Have you ever wondered what would happen if one moment could change everything? In a small diner on Maple Street, two strangers are about to cross paths in a way that will transform both their lives forever. A simple overheard conversation. An envelope left on a table. A secret connection neither could have imagined. Sometimes the smallest gesture can ripple through time in ways we never expect. What happens when kindness comes from the most unexpected source? And what if that kindness isn't random at all? The morning rush at Sonny's diner had just ended when Anaya Evans tucked a loose strand of brown hair behind her ear. Her feet ached in her worn sneakers as she refilled coffee mugs with a smile that never quite reached her tired eyes. At 28, she looked older. Years of worry etched into the corners of her face. "Here you go, Mrs. Pembroke, just how you like it, with extra cream," Anaya said, setting down the mug carefully in front of the elderly woman who came in every Tuesday. "Thank you, dear." Mrs. Pembroke squinted at the menu. "These words keep getting smaller every year." Anaya gently took the laminated menu. "Let me read it to you. Today's special is meatloaf with mashed potatoes and green beans for $8.99. Mrs. Pembroke's face lit up. "That sounds perfect." "Coming right up," Anaya said, writing down the order with a pencil stub. As she headed toward the kitchen, her phone buzzed in her apron pocket. The name Mr. Grimes flashed on the screen, and her stomach knotted. She ducked into the small employee break room and answered. "Hello, Mr. Grimes. Ms. Evans, I'm calling about your rent." His voice was cold and flat. It was due 2 weeks ago. Anaya closed her eyes and pressed her back against the wall. "I know. I'm so sorry. I get paid Friday. Can I have just 3 more days?" "That's what you said last week. I mean it this time. The diner has been slow, but we have a big group booking tomorrow." She twisted the phone cord around her finger. "Please, Mr. Grimes. Lily and I have nowhere else to go." "Not my problem. I need the money by tomorrow, or I'll have to start eviction." The line went dead. Anaya stared at the phone, her vision blurring with tears. 3 months of back-to-back. Bills had drained her savings. Lily's special tutoring for dyslexia wasn't covered by insurance, and the car repair last month had cost twice what she expected. She took a deep breath and wiped her eyes. Lily was counting on her. Her sweet 6-year-old with bouncy curls and a gap-toothed smile deserved better than this. "Order up!" Sonny's voice called from the kitchen. Anaya splashed cold water on her face and headed back out. As she balanced 3 plates along her arm, her mind raced with numbers. Even with every tip going straight into her rent jar, she was still $400 short. The plate of eggs slipped from her grasp, shattering on the checkered floor. "I'm so sorry," she gasped, kneeling to pick up the pieces. Sonny, a round man with kind eyes, appeared with a broom. "Don't worry about it, Anaya. Accidents happen. I'll pay for it, I promise." Sonny waved her off. "Nonsense. You okay? You look pale." Anaya forced a smile. "Just tired. Lily had trouble sleeping last night." He nodded, understanding in his eyes. Everyone at the diner knew about Lily's struggles with reading and how hard Anaya worked to help. "Her. Take 5 minutes. I've got this," Sonny said. "Thanks, but I'm fine." She couldn't afford to take breaks, not when every dollar counted. The bell above the door jingled as a new customer walked in. A man in his early 40s with salt and pepper hair and a simple gray sweater took a seat in the corner booth. He carried a newspaper under his arm and had the quiet look of someone who wanted to be left alone. Anaya grabbed a menu and fresh silverware. "I'll take that one," she told Dion, the other server. As she approached the corner booth, she pushed thoughts. Of rent and eviction aside, this customer didn't need to see her problems. "Welcome to Sunny's," she said with a warm smile that came from years of practice. "Can I start you with some coffee?" The man looked up, and Anaya was struck by how tired his eyes seemed. Not physically tired, but something deeper. "Just black coffee and toast, please," he said quietly, his voice gentle. She wrote it down. "Coming right up." At the next table, Mrs. Pembroke waved her over. "Anaya, how's your little Lily doing with her reading?" Anaya's smile became genuine. "Much better, thanks for asking. The new tutor has really helped. She read a whole page by herself last night." "That's wonderful. She's a fighter, just like her mama." "I hope so," Anaya said, refilling Mrs. Pembroke's water glass. From the corner booth, the man in the gray sweater watched over his newspaper as Anaya moved between tables, always with a kind word for each person. When a customer dropped their fork, she was there with a clean one before they could ask. When a child spilled milk, she cleaned it up without making the parents feel bad. And when her phone rang again in her pocket, he noticed how her smile faltered just for a second before she excused herself to take the call. He pretended to read his paper, but found himself listening instead. "Jade, I don't know what to do," Anaya whispered into the phone, her back turned to the dining room. "Mr. Grimes wants the rent by tomorrow, or we're out." Fletcher Reed lowered his newspaper slightly. He hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but something in the waitress's voice caught his attention. It reminded him of his mother's desperate calls many years ago. "I'm still short $400, she continued. "And Lily's tutor needs to be paid this week too, or she'll stop coming." Fletcher sipped his coffee slowly. 3 weeks ago, he had sold his cybersecurity company, Shield Tech, for $2 billion. The headlines had called him a visionary and tech genius, but sitting here in his plain sweater, no one gave him a second glance. He preferred it that way. "If we move again, Lily will have to change schools," Anaya was saying, her voice breaking. "She's just starting to make progress with her reading. I can't do that to her. Not again." Fletcher watched as she wiped away a tear before turning back to face the diner, her smile firmly back in place, as if nothing was wrong. It was a skill he recognized, hiding your struggles from the world. At 42, Fletcher had more money than he could spend in 10 lifetimes. Yet he'd felt hollow since the sale of his company. What was the point of all his success if it didn't mean anything? He'd begun this cross-country trip 3 weeks ago, staying in small towns, eating at local diners, and trying to remember what real life felt like before board meetings and investor calls consumed him. "Here's your toast," Anaya said, returning to his table with a small plate. "Can I get you anything else?" Up close, Fletcher noticed the dark circles under her eyes and how her uniform had been carefully mended at the cuff. "This is perfect, thank you." He smiled at her. "I'm Fletcher." She looked surprised at the introduction but recovered quickly. "I'm Anaya. Let me know if you need anything else, Fletcher." 2 tables away, a couple in expensive clothes waved impatiently. "Excuse me, miss," the woman called sharply. "This bacon is too crispy, and the eggs are cold." Anaya hurried over. "I'm so sorry about that. I'll get you fresh ones right away." "And the coffee is bitter," the man added with a frown. "I'll bring a fresh pot immediately," Anaya promised, taking their plates. Fletcher watched as she apologized again and rushed to fix their complaints. When she returned with perfect eggs, crisp but not too crisp bacon, and fresh coffee, the couple barely acknowledged her. When they left 20 minutes later, Fletcher saw Anaya's face fall slightly as she picked up their check. No tip. She cleared their table efficiently, then moved to the next, never letting her smile slip again. His own childhood flashed through his mind, watching his mother count coins at the kitchen table, trying to make rent. She, too, had worked as a waitress, serving people who had no idea how their thoughtlessness affected her life. Fletcher finished his coffee and toast, leaving most of the food untouched. He wasn't really hungry anyway. His phone buzzed with messages from his financial advisor about investment opportunities, his assistant about pending meetings, his lawyer about paperwork that needed signing. He ignored them all. Instead, he watched Anaya as she stepped away again to make another call. "Hi, Mrs. Chen. It's Anaya Evans, Lily's mom," she said softly. "I wanted to let you know I'll have the tutor payment by Friday." "Yes, I know it's the third time. I understand completely if you need to assign Lily's time slot to someone else." Her shoulders slumped as she listened. "Thank you so much for understanding. Lily loves working with you, and she's making such progress. This won't happen again, I promise." When she hung up, she pressed her palms against her eyes for a moment before straightening her shoulders and walking back into the dining area. Fletcher had made his decision before she even returned. He'd been drifting without purpose, burdened by wealth that seemed meaningless. But here was something real, something he understood from his own life. He beckoned to Sonny, who was wiping down the counter. "Could I get my check?" he asked quietly. "Sure thing," Sonny said, bringing over the small slip of paper. Fletcher handed him a $20 bill. "I was wondering if you have an envelope." Sonny looked confused but nodded. "I think we have some in the office." "And a pen?" When Sonny returned with both items, Fletcher wrote Anaya's name carefully on the front of the envelope. Inside, he placed 50 $100 bills and a simple note. He left quickly, before she could return to his table. Through the window, he paused to watch as she approached his now empty booth, envelope waiting. For the first time in weeks, Fletcher Reed felt something other than emptiness. He turned and walked down Maple Street, disappearing into the morning crowd. Back inside Sonny's diner, Anaya returned from helping Mrs. Pembroke to her car. She spotted the empty corner booth and hurried over, worried the quiet customer had left without paying. But there on the table, next to his barely touched toast, sat a white envelope with her name written in neat handwriting. "That man in the E. Gray sweater left it for you," Sonny called from behind the counter. "Paid his bill in cash, too. Left before you came back." Anaya picked up the envelope. It was thick and heavy in her hands. "Did he say anything?" Sonny shook his head. "Nope. Just asked for the envelope and a pen, wrote something, and headed out." A strange feeling washed over her as she slid her finger under the flap. Inside, she found a stack of crisp $100 bills and a small note card. Her hands began to shake as she counted. 1,000, 2,000, $5,000. The room seemed to tilt. This had to be a mistake. Nobody left tips like this, especially not for coffee and toast. She unfolded the note. "Everyone deserves a break sometimes. No strings attached." Anaya's legs gave way, and she sank into the booth. Her breath came in short gasps. "Hey, you okay?" Dayon asked, approaching with a coffee pot. His eyes widened when he saw what was in her hands. "Whoa! What is that?" $5,000, she whispered, still not believing it. "That customer, he left it for me." "The quiet guy? You're kidding." Dayon leaned closer. "Let me see that." Anaya handed him the note, but clutched the money tightly. "What will you do with it?" Dayon asked, his voice hushed. The question snapped, her back to reality. She stuffed the money back into the envelope and stood up quickly. "I need to find him," she said, rushing toward the door. "This must be a mistake." Outside on Maple Street, she looked up and down the sidewalk. Morning shoppers and office workers streamed past, but there was no sign of the man in the gray sweater. She ran half a block in each direction, searching faces, but Fletcher Reed was gone. Anaya returned to the diner, the envelope burning a hole in her apron pocket. She couldn't focus for the rest of her shift. Every time the bell jingled above the door, she looked up, hoping it was him returning to take back the money, to explain that it had been a terrible mistake, but he never came back. When her shift ended at 3 o'clock, she sat in her rusty car in the diner's parking lot, staring at the envelope. $5,000. Her rent was $200 a month, and she was behind by 2 months. Lily's tutor cost $200 a week. The electric bill was past due. The car needed new brakes. This money could solve everything. But could she really keep it? She called her sister. "Jade, something crazy happened today," Anaya said when her sister answered. "What's wrong? Is Lily okay?" Jade immediately sounded worried. "She's fine. She's still at school." Anaya took a deep breath. "A customer left me $5,000 as a tip." Silence filled the line. "Jade? Are you there?" "I'm sorry," Jade finally said. "I thought you said someone left you $5,000. "I did. A man at the diner. He overheard me talking about the rent and Lily's tutor." Anaya's voice cracked. "But I don't know him. I can't take this." "Of course you can," Jade said firmly. "Anaya, this is the break you've been praying for." "But it's so much money. What if he made a mistake? What if he meant $50, not $5,000? He wrote you a note, right? He meant it. Some people have money to give, Anaya, and right now, you need it." Tears filled Anaya's eyes as she looked at the envelope. "It feels wrong. What feels wrong is you and Lily being evicted when someone just handed you a solution," Jade countered. "Think about Lily. Think about what another move would do to her progress." Anaya wiped her eyes, picturing Lily's face if they had to leave. Their apartment, her school, her friends, her tutor. All the stability she'd worked so hard to create for her daughter. Gone. "Okay," she whispered. "Good. Now go pay that awful Mr. Grimes and then buy some groceries. Real ones, not the discount stuff that's about to expire." After hanging up, Anaya drove to the bank first, depositing most of the money but keeping enough. Cash for the rent. Then she headed to Mr. Grimes's office across town. The small, stuffy room smelled of cigarettes and cheap air freshener. Mr. Grimes barely looked up from his computer when she entered. "Ms. Evans, do you have my money?" Anaya pulled out the envelope, now containing $2,400 for 2 months' rent. "Yes, sir, in full." He looked surprised as he counted it twice. "Well, this is unexpected. I'd like a receipt, please," Anaya said, her voice steadier than she felt as Mr. Grimes wrote out the receipt. Anaya felt a weight lift from her shoulders. For the first time in months, she wouldn't have to worry about having a roof over their heads. Outside his office, standing in the warm afternoon sun, she finally let the tears flow freely. But these weren't tears of fear or worry. These were different. These were tears of relief, of gratitude, of hope. She held the rent receipt to her chest and cried happy tears, all because of a stranger in a gray sweater who had seen her when she felt invisible. A week later, Anaya still thought about the mysterious man every time the bell above the diner door jingled. She'd put aside $100 of the money to buy a thank you gift if she ever saw him again. It wasn't much compared to what he'd given her, but she wanted him to know how much his kindness had changed her life. "Order up," Sunny called from the kitchen, sliding 2 plates of pancakes onto the counter. As Anaya delivered the breakfast to a young couple, she noticed Dion staring at a magazine by the register. "What's got you so interested?" she asked, refilling sugar. "Dispensers. This tech magazine," he said, turning it toward her. "I swear the guy from last week looks like someone in here." Anaya leaned over to look, but a group of teenagers entered the diner, and she hurried to seat them. By the time she returned, Dion had put the magazine away. "Seriously, Anaya, I think your mystery tipper might be famous," he said as they worked, side by side refilling ketchup bottles during the afternoon lull. "Famous for what? Being nice to waitresses?" she joked, but curiosity gnawed at her. Dion shook his head. "I can't place it, but his face looked familiar. Like I've seen him on TV or something." "Well, if he comes back, you can ask for his autograph," she said with a laugh, but her eyes drifted to the door again. Across town, Fletcher Reed sat in his hotel room, reading an article on his tablet. The local community center was closing due to lack of funding. It had provided after-school programs for children with learning disabilities and other needs for 15 years. He scrolled through pictures of kids playing in a colorful room with special learning stations. According to the article, over 60 children would lose access to tutoring and support when the center closed next month. Fletcher set down his tablet and looked out the window. He'd spent a week in this small town, longer than he'd planned. Something about it, about the diner, about Anaya, had made him want to stay. He'd driven past Sunny's twice, but hadn't gone in. He wasn't sure why. Perhaps he was afraid she'd be uncomfortable knowing who he was, or that she'd feel obligated to thank him. That wasn't what he wanted, but today he decided he would go back. Just for coffee. The afternoon rush at Sunny's was in full swing when Fletcher walked in. He chose a booth in Dion's section, not Anaya's. He wanted to observe without making her uncomfortable. From behind his menu, he watched her move efficiently between tables, that same kind smile on her face. She looked less tired today, her steps lighter. Good, he thought. At least he'd done one worthwhile thing with his money. Dion approached his table, notepad in hand. "Welcome to Sunny's. What can I get?" He stopped mid-sentence, his eyes widening slightly. "It's you!" Fletcher shifted uncomfortably. "Just coffee, please." But Dion kept staring. "You're Fletcher Reed, aren't you? The Shield Tech guy?" Fletcher gave a small nod, keeping his voice low. "I'd appreciate your discretion." "Wow, I knew you looked familiar." Dion's face broke into a grin. "You were on the cover of Tech Innovators last month." "Coffee," Fletcher reminded him gently. "Right. Sorry. Coming right up." But instead of heading to the coffee pot, Dion hurried over to Anaya, who was arranging pies in the display case. Fletcher watched as Dion whispered something to her, gesturing subtly in his direction. Anaya's head snapped up, her eyes finding his across the diner. Her cheeks flushed pink as recognition dawned on her face. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Anaya smoothed her apron, tucked her hair behind her ear, and walked slowly toward his table. "It was you," she said quietly, standing before him. "You're the one who left the envelope." Fletcher nodded, suddenly feeling awkward. He hadn't planned what to say if he saw her again. "Dion says you're famous? A billionaire?" Her voice held confusion, as if the pieces didn't quite fit together. "I owned a technology company," he admitted. "I sold it recently." "But why would you?" "Why me?" Anaya asked, her brow furrowed. A young mother at a nearby table waved for service, saving Fletcher from answering immediately. I need to— Anaya gestured toward the customer. Of course, Fletcher said. I'll wait. As she walked away, he wondered if he'd made a mistake coming back. Perhaps it would have been better to remain anonymous, just a kind stranger passing through. But when Anaya returned a few minutes later, carrying a slice of apple pie she hadn't ordered, the genuine smile on her face told him otherwise. This is on the house, she said, placing the pie before him. And I was wondering, would you stay until my shift ends? There's someone I'd like you to meet. Fletcher looked up at her, surprised by the invitation. I'd like that, he said, and meant it. Anaya nodded, seeming suddenly shy. I get off at 4. As she turned to go, Fletcher called after her softly. Anaya? She looked back. The pie looks delicious. Thank you. Anaya nodded with a small smile and returned to her other tables, stealing glances at Fletcher between orders. A billionaire in her diner, who had given her enough money to save her home. The thought made her dizzy. At 4 o'clock, Anaya hung up her apron and grabbed her purse from the break room. Her hands trembled slightly as she applied a fresh coat of lip gloss and brushed her hair. She wasn't sure why she was nervous. This wasn't a date. She just wanted him to meet Lily, to see what his kindness had preserved. Fletcher was still in the booth when she emerged, reading something on his phone. He stood when he saw her approach. Ready? She asked, her voice sounding higher than normal. Lead the way, he replied with a gentle smile. They walked in awkward silence for half a block before Anaya found her voice. I don't know how to thank you, she began. What you did, the money, it saved us from eviction. Fletcher nodded, looking uncomfortable with the gratitude. I'm glad it helped. But why? Anaya stopped walking and turned to face him. Why would you give that much money to a stranger? Was it because— Did you feel sorry for me? Fletcher considered his answer carefully. I grew up poor, he said finally. My mom was a waitress too. Single parent, like you. Anaya's eyes widened in surprise. With his success, she had assumed he came from privilege. When I was 9, we were about to be evicted, he continued as they resumed walking. Mom was 3 months behind on rent. I remember her crying at the kitchen table every night. What happened? Anaya asked softly. One day at the diner where she worked, a customer overheard her talking about our situation. The next day, he left an envelope with enough money to cover our rent. I never forgot what that meant to us. Anaya absorbed this, a lump forming in her throat. So you were paying it forward? Fletcher nodded. Something like that. They reached Franklin Elementary, school just as the final bell rang. Dozens of children poured out of the doors, their excited voices filling the air. That's her, Anaya said, pointing to a small girl with bouncy brown curls sitting on a bench, carefully putting books into her backpack. Lily looked up and broke into a gap-toothed grin when she spotted her mother. She ran over, launching herself into Anaya's arms. Mommy, I read a whole chapter book today. Mrs. Chen said, I'm getting super good. That's amazing, sweetheart. Anaya hugged her tight, then turned to Fletcher. Lily, this is my friend, Mr. Reed. Lily regarded him curiously. Do you like cookies? We're making chocolate chip today. Fletcher crouched down to her level. Chocolate chip are my favorite, and you can call me Fletcher. That's a funny name, Lily giggled. Like a bird. Lily, Anaya admonished, but Fletcher laughed. It is kind of like a bird, isn't it? I never thought of that. They walked toward Anaya's apartment, Lily chattering between them about her day at school. When they reached the small brick building, Anaya hesitated. Would you like to come up? For coffee or— if you're not busy. Fletcher checked his watch. I'd like that. Their apartment was small but tidy. Crayon drawings decorated the refrigerator, and bookshelves lined one wall of the living room. While Lily changed out of her school clothes, Anaya put on coffee and arranged some cookies on a plate. "Thank you for inviting me," Fletcher said, looking around the cozy space. "I wanted you to see what your gift really meant," Anaya replied. "It wasn't just money to me. It was stability for Lily. She's had to move schools 3 times in 2 years before we found this place." Fletcher nodded understanding. "My mom and I moved 7 times before I was 12. It's hard to always be the new kid." "Exactly," Anaya said, relieved he understood. Lily bounded back into the room, carrying a book. "Can we read now, please?" "Let's have cookies first," Anaya suggested. "Then reading." As they sat at the small kitchen table, Anaya found herself studying Fletcher. In his simple clothes, with no pretense, he seemed nothing like the billionaire tech genius Dion had described. There was something genuine about him, something kind, in his eyes when he listened to Lily's stories. "What made you start your company?" Anaya asked when Lily went to wash her hands. "I wanted to create something that would help people," Fletcher said. "But somewhere along the way, it became about growth and profit margins and shareholder value." He stared into his coffee cup. "When I sold it, I realized I had everything and nothing at the same time." "Is that why you're here? In a small town, eating at diners?" He smiled ruefully. "I'm trying to remember what matters." "And have you?" "Remembered?" Their eyes met across the table, and something passed between them. A moment of connection, of understanding. "I'm starting to," he said softly. Lily returned with her book, climbing onto Fletcher's lap as if she'd known him forever. "Will you stay for dinner?" Anaya heard herself ask. "It's just spaghetti, nothing fancy." "I'd like that very much," Fletcher replied. As Lily opened her book, pointing proudly to words she could now read, Anaya watched them together and felt something she hadn't experienced in a long time: hope. The next afternoon, Anaya checked her watch for the 5th time in an hour. Fletcher had promised to return to the diner for more pie, but he hadn't shown up. "He's probably busy," Dion said, noticing her glance at the door again. "The guy's a billionaire. He's got more important things to do than hang out in a diner." "You're right," Anaya said, forcing a smile. "I don't know what I was thinking." But as her shift wore on, she couldn't help feeling disappointed. Last night had been wonderful. Fletcher had stayed for dinner, helped Lily with a puzzle, and talked with Anaya long after Lily went to bed. For a few hours, it had felt like they were old friends. "Don't forget we need volunteers at the center today," Sunny called as Anaya hung up her apron at the end of her shift. "I'll be there," she promised. Every Saturday, Anaya and Lily volunteered at the Oak Ridge Community Center. The center offered after-school programs for kids with learning disabilities, including a special reading group that had helped Lily gain confidence before she started with her private tutor. When Anaya picked up Lily from school, her daughter was bursting with excitement. "We're bringing cookies to Miss Rachel, right?" Lily bounced in the passenger seat. "I made her a card, too." "That's so sweet," Anaya said, squeezing Lily's hand. "Miss Rachel will love it." The community center was housed in an old brick building with a faded mural of children playing on the side. Inside, colorful artwork decorated the walls, and shelves of books and games lined the main room. Rachel Chen, the center's director and also Lily's tutor, greeted them at the door. "My favorite volunteers," she said, hugging Lily. "Thank you for the cookies." "Is everything okay, Rachel?" Anaya asked, noticing the worry lines around the woman's eyes. Rachel sighed, leading Anaya to a quiet corner while Lily joined other children at a craft table. "Not really. The county cut our funding again. We've been trying to find donors, but—" She gestured around the well-worn space. "We're not exactly glamorous enough for big corporate sponsors." "How long can you stay open?" Anaya asked, her stomach dropping. "A month, maybe less," Rachel admitted. "I haven't told the families yet. I wanted to have a plan first, but I'm running out of options." Anaya watched the children working together at tables, kids who struggled in traditional classrooms but flourished here with specialized attention. Lily had been so withdrawn before finding this place, so frustrated with reading that she would cry when asked to try. Now she proudly carried books everywhere. "What can I do to help?" Anaya asked. "Just being here means a lot," Rachel said. "These kids need stability more than anything." For the next 2 hours, Anaya helped children with art projects, while Rachel met with parents in her office. Lily moved from table to table, helping younger kids with their projects, her face serious with responsibility. "Mom, look what Charlie made," Lily called, holding up a colorful paper fish. As Anaya admired the creation, the front door opened. Rachel emerged from her office, her face transformed. "Everyone," she announced, her voice shaking slightly. "I just received amazing news. An anonymous donor has given us $100,000. The room erupted in confused murmurs from adults and cheers from children who sensed the excitement without understanding why. "We can stay open?" one parent asked, hope in her voice. "Yes," Rachel beamed, "for at least 2 more years. The donation just came through electronically. All it says is that it's from a friend of the community." Anaya's heart raced as parents hugged each other, and children continued their crafts, blissfully unaware of how close they had come to losing their special place. And then, as if summoned by her thoughts, the front door opened again, and Fletcher walked in. He wore the same gray sweater and simple jeans, looking around curiously at the center. Their eyes met across the room, and in that moment, Anaya knew. She approached him slowly, conscious of Rachel watching with interest. "You didn't come for pie," she said quietly. "I had something important to take care of," Fletcher replied, his eyes moving around the room, taking in the children working together, the worn furniture, the love evident in every handmade decoration. "The donation," Anaya whispered. "That was you, wasn't it?" Fletcher shrugged, looking almost embarrassed. "I read about the center closing. It seemed like a good place." "You have no idea what this means to these kids," Anaya said, emotion thickening her voice. "To Lily. This place saved her before I could afford a tutor." Before Fletcher could respond, Lily spotted him and ran over. "Fletcher, you came to our special place." She grabbed his hand. "Come see my reading corner." As Lily dragged him toward a small nook with cushions and bookshelves, Rachel sidled up to Anaya. "Who is that?" she asked. "And why is my usually shy Lily pulling him around like an old friend?" "He's someone I recently met," Anaya said, watching as Fletcher sat cross-legged on a cushion while Lily showed him her favorite books. "He had dinner with us last night." Rachel raised an eyebrow. "He seems nice." "He is?" Anaya murmured, wondering how to explain that the man her daughter was chattering to had just saved the center with a $100,000 donation. Or that a week ago, he had saved her home with another generous gift. Or that despite his wealth and success, he seemed more at peace sitting on a child-sized cushion listening to Lily than he had when she first met him. When the center closed for the day, Fletcher offered to walk them home. As they strolled through the park, Lily ran ahead to the playground, her energy undiminished. "Thank you," Anaya said simply, watching her daughter climb fearlessly up the slide. Fletcher smiled, his eyes following Lily's movement. For what? You know exactly what, Anaya replied, giving him a meaningful look. The center. That was you, wasn't it? Instead of answering directly, Fletcher turned to look at her, his expression suddenly serious. Can I ask you something? Of course. What would you do if you could do anything? If money wasn't an issue? The question caught Anaya off guard. No one had asked about her dreams in a very long time. She hesitated, watching Lily pump her legs on the swing. I've always wanted to open a bookstore cafe. Tell me about it, Fletcher encouraged, his eyes genuinely interested. Something in his attention gave her courage. Not just any bookstore, one designed especially for kids with learning differences, with special reading nooks, and staff trained to help struggling readers, and regular events where kids could practice reading aloud to therapy dogs. Her words came faster as the long-held dream took shape. And a cafe section where parents could relax while their kids explore books without pressure. That sounds wonderful, Fletcher said softly. It's just a dream, Anaya shrugged, suddenly embarrassed. I barely finished community college before Lily came along. I don't know the first thing about running a business. Fletcher was quiet for a moment. Dreams matter, Anaya. Sometimes they're all that keeps us going. Over the next 3 weeks, Fletcher became a regular at the diner. He always sat in Anaya's section, ordered different items each day, and left generous tips for everyone. The other servers stopped giving Anaya curious looks and accepted his presence as normal. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, he would arrive shortly before Anaya's shift ended and walk with her to pick up Lily from school. Sometimes, they would go for ice, cream, or to the park. Other days, they would head to Anaya's apartment, where Fletcher would help Lily with her reading. How did you get so good at helping her sound out words? Anaya asked one evening as they washed dishes side by side while Lily played in her room. Fletcher's hands stilled over the soapy water. I had trouble reading as a kid, too. You did? He nodded. Dyslexia. Pretty severe. I didn't read fluently until I was 12. But you're so successful, Anaya said, surprised. Your technology company? Being dyslexic taught me to solve problems differently, Fletcher said. I couldn't read the manuals, so I had to figure out computers by experimenting. It became an advantage in a way. He paused. But I never told anyone. Not my business partners, not the press. You're the first person I've told in 20 years. Why tell me? Anaya asked quietly. Fletcher stared out the window. Because when I'm with you and Lily, I don't feel like I need to pretend. The following Saturday at the community center, Fletcher joined them again. He had brought new beanbag chairs for the reading corner and a tablet loaded with dyslexia-friendly books. As Lily showed other children how to use the tablet, Rachel pulled Anaya aside. Your friend is amazing with these kids, she said, watching Fletcher patiently help a boy sound out words. How long have you known him? About a month, Anaya replied. Rachel raised an eyebrow. Only a month? You seem close? Anaya felt her cheeks warm. He's easy to talk to. Later, as they walked home through the park that had become their regular route, Fletcher seemed quieter than usual. Is everything okay? Anaya asked. I need to tell you something, he said, guiding her to a bench while Lily collected pine cones nearby. About the community center donation. I already know it was you, Anaya said. Yes, but... Fletcher took a deep breath. I want to be honest with you. When I made that donation, part of me was trying to impress you. Anaya blinked, surprised at his candor. Since selling my company, I've felt empty, he continued. Nothing meant anything. But then I met you and Lily, and suddenly I had a reason to get up in the morning, to come to the diner, to help at the center. That's not a bad thing, Anaya said gently. But I don't want you to think I'm just throwing money around to make myself feel better, Fletcher insisted, or to make you like me. I think it's a little late for that, Anaya said with a small smile. I already like you. Fletcher's face softened. I like you too, Anaya. More than I expected to. They sat in comfortable silence, watching Lily arrange her pine cones in patterns on the ground. Can I ask you something else about your bookstore dream? Fletcher said finally. Sure. Have you ever looked into what it would take? Space, inventory, startup costs? Anaya laughed. No, it's always been firmly in the someday category. Why? Fletcher seemed hesitant. Would you meet me tomorrow? There's something I want to show you. What is it? A surprise, he said. But I think you'll like it. Anaya studied his face. In just a month, she had come to trust this man who had appeared in her life so unexpectedly. He had seen her at her lowest, helped her without judgment, and brought joy to her daughter's life. Okay, she agreed, but no more surprise donations. Promise? Fletcher held up his hands. This is different, I promise. As Lily ran back to them, arms full of pine cones, Fletcher leaned closer to Anaya. Just one more thing, he said quietly. I never told anyone about my dyslexia because I was afraid people would think less of me, that they'd think I wasn't smart enough to run my company if they knew. That's ridiculous, Anaya said. Look how much you've accomplished. I know that now, Fletcher said, watching Lily proudly show off her collection. But sometimes we need someone else to help us see ourselves clearly. Lily dumped her pine cones into Fletcher's lap. These are for your hotel room, she declared. To make it pretty, Fletcher gathered them carefully, as if they were precious gems. Thank you, Lily. These are the best pine cones anyone has ever given me. And in that moment, looking at this billionaire businessman, cradling her daughter's pine cones with such genuine appreciation, Anaya felt something shift in her heart. Next afternoon, Anaya checked her appearance in the mirror one last time. She had asked Jade to watch Lily, wanting to focus on whatever Fletcher was planning to show her. You look nice, Jade said, leaning against the doorframe. So, where's this mystery man taking you? I don't know, Anaya admitted, smoothing her simple blue dress. He just gave me an address downtown. Jade raised an eyebrow. Very mysterious. I still can't believe you're dating a billionaire. We're not dating, Anaya insisted, though the flutter in her stomach suggested otherwise. Uh-huh, Jade smirked. That's why you changed outfits 3 times. Downtown was only a 15-minute walk from Anaya's apartment. As she approached the address Fletcher had given her, she slowed her steps in confusion. It was an empty storefront on Main Street, its windows covered with brown paper. A small "For Lease" sign hung in the corner, crossed out with red marker. Fletcher stood outside, hands in his pockets, looking nervous. You made it, he said with a smile. What is this place? Anaya asked. Instead of answering, Fletcher pulled a key from his pocket and unlocked the door. After you. Anaya stepped inside. The space was large and empty, with high ceilings, hardwood, floors, and large windows that let in streams of afternoon sunlight. Along one wall ran a long counter that reminded her of a cafe. It's a beautiful space, she said, turning slowly to take it all in. Fletcher handed her a folder. Open it. Inside was a thick document titled Bookends, A specialized bookstore cafe. Business plan. Anaya flipped through the pages, her heart racing as she saw detailed financial projections, floor plans with reading nooks, and a section called Specialized Programs for Children with Learning Differences. "Fletcher, what is this?" she whispered. "It's your bookstore," he said simply. "Or it could be." She stared at the business plan. "I don't understand." "You told me your dream," Fletcher explained. "I wanted to see if it could work, so I had my team run the numbers. With the right setup and marketing, it could be profitable within 2 years." Anaya's hands trembled as she turned the pages. There was her dream, laid out in black and white, with every detail she had mentioned that day, in the park. "But why?" she asked. "Why would you do this?" Fletcher stepped closer. "Because helping you, knowing you and Lily, has given me purpose again. For years, I've been building technology, making money, but not connecting with anyone, not doing anything that truly mattered." He gestured around the empty space. "This matters." A knock at the door interrupted them. A woman in a tailored suit entered, carrying a leather portfolio. "Mr. Reed? I have the papers you requested," she said. "Thank you, Ms. Harmon," Fletcher replied. "This is Anaya Evans." "Pleasure to meet you, Ms. Evans," the woman smiled. "I have all the transfer documents ready for your signatures." "Transfer documents?" Anaya echoed, her confusion growing. "For the building," Ms. Harmon replied, looking between them. "Mr. Reed asked me to prepare the deed transfer." "Fletcher, what is she talking about?" Anaya asked, her voice rising slightly. Fletcher looked uncomfortable. I wanted to help make your dream real." "By buying me a building?" Anaya shook her head. "I can't accept something like that. It's too much." Fletcher's face fell. "I understand." Ms. Harmon cleared her throat, awkwardly. "Perhaps I should come back another time." She opened her portfolio and removed some papers. "Actually, there seems to be some confusion." She checked the document again. "The building is already in Ms. Evans's name." "What?" Anaya and Fletcher spoke in unison. Ms. Harmon looked confused. "According to these papers, Mr. Reed purchased the building last week, but immediately transferred ownership to Anaya Evans." She showed Anaya the document. "See? It's already done. I'm just here for the final signatures on the tax forms." Anaya stared at Fletcher in disbelief. "You already put the building in my name? Without asking me?" Fletcher ran a hand through his hair. "I wanted it to be yours, no strings attached. If you don't want the bookstore, you can sell the building. But I wanted you to have the choice." Anaya struggled to process what was happening. "Fletcher, this is crazy. You can't just give people buildings." "There's something else you should know," Fletcher said quietly. "Something I discovered last week." He took a deep breath. 20 years ago, my father took my family to dinner at a place called Maggie's Diner in Richmond. Anaya froze. "What did you say?" "The waitress who served us was named Margaret Evans." Fletcher continued. "My father overheard her talking about being a single mom struggling to make rent. Before we left, he gave her a big tip, enough to cover her rent for 3 months. That's impossible," Anaya whispered. "My mother's name was Margaret. Everyone called her Maggie. She waited tables at a diner in Richmond before we moved here." "I recognized your last name the first day," Fletcher admitted. "I had my assistant check. Your mother helped my father when he was going through cancer treatment. That meal was one of his last good days." Anaya's eyes filled with tears. "My mom used to tell me about a customer who left her a huge tip when things were really bad. She said it saved us from being homeless. Don't you see, Anaya? This isn't charity. It's completing a circle. Fletcher took her hand. Your mother's kindness gave my father joy in his final weeks. Now I can help her daughter. Ms. Harmon quietly stepped outside, leaving them alone. Anaya looked around the empty space, seeing not what it was, but what it could become. Children, finding books they could read. Parents finding support. A community being built. All because of a circle of kindness that had started 2 decades ago. So, Fletcher said softly, what do you think? Would you like to open a bookstore, Anaya? Wiped away happy tears and smiled. I think we'd better get started. Outside on the sidewalk, Lily pressed her nose against the window, watching as her mother and Fletcher stood in the empty space, planning a dream together. With a washable marker she'd brought from home, she began to draw pictures of books on the glass. That was the end of this touching story of kindness and connection. Where are you listening from? If you enjoyed The Tipping Point, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming stories just like this one. Don't forget to share with your friends and family to help spread kindness and awareness. Small acts of generosity can create ripples that change lives forever, just as they did for Anaya and Fletcher. Thank you for listening.